All right. Part of our spring selling season is to take you through everything buying and selling as activity ticks up in the market. So today we're going to cover private treaty sales, what they are, how they look end to end, and everything that you need to keep an eye out for. So first thing that I thought we would jump into is, Pete, can you walk us through what is a private treaty?
Private treaties are negotiations behind closed door, so to speak. So basically, the process will be you'll go and look at the property and then you'll decide whether or not you want to submit an offer. And often it's your best and final, put that through to the agent and hope that it's accepted. It's very different to the auction process, which is what we talked about last week, where it's in front of everyone and everyone's bidding to win the property. Yeah, it's all behind closed doors and you hope for the best when you submit the offer.
There may or may not be a deadline.
Yeah.
With an auction, you've got a deadline. With private treaty, there might not be one.
Yeah, for sure. It's definitely the more traditional way of selling a home that most people are used to, right? Go to an open home, there's multiple people there, everyone puts in offers, and the best one gets selected at the end of the day. Really good frame to start with in terms of what is a private treaty. Now, moving into the steps, I thought it would be good to frame this episode around the actual journey of someone going through a private treaty sale. So what would be the first thing that would happen, Pete?
So you've got to find the listing. And I think this is where a lot of time and effort needs to go in because you can find yourself wasting a lot of weekends looking at homes that you can't afford or don't suit you. So you do need to get really clear on what exactly you're looking for and realistic budget expectations as well. So once you've worked with your mortgage broker around budget, looking at realestate.com domain to find properties that may suit, checking out the price guide, checking out recent comparables. If that all kind of ticks off and matches your budget, then you can go and have a look at the property. But another way to find listings as well is to give agents a call because it's always good to, give them the heads up that not only are you going to be attending the open home, but to introduce yourself and they may actually have other opportunities coming up too. So if you're front of mind, you may get a call back from the agent and potentially get access to off-market listings as well.
That's a lot of what you do in the buyer's agent's world, right? Is building those relationships and getting access to those properties first.
Definitely. You just got to get on the phone and speak with the agents. No emails, call them and try to get to know them and make sure you're front of mind.
Mm-hmm. And you touched on something really good there in terms of setting a budget and getting really clear on the numbers. Sky, I know when you're listing a property, probably one of the biggest frustrations is when someone's not clear on how much they can actually purchase for, right? Or whether they're finance ready. So it's probably really crucial for anyone that's looking to get into looking for a property is that they're really clear on that budget and potentially have a pre-approval in place first, right?
Yes. As I was telling you guys before, someone who finally secured a property pulled out because they realized it was going to be too expensive for them. And that was after months of searching. And you just would have thought those numbers would have been run through the calculator before we got to the point of actually securing a property.
Mm-hmm. You'd think so, but sometimes things don't work out the way that we want them to, unfortunately. So getting clear on those numbers and finding the listing is probably step one when you're looking at a private treaty process. Now, let's say I'm a first home buyer. I've gone in, I've had a look. I'm happy with the place. I've gone to the open. What's the next stage in that process? I'm ready to go. What do I do next?
Well, it would just be a conversation with the agent about putting in an offer and what their process is, because I'm finding that every agent has a different process or a different platform that they're using to make an offer. So for me, for example, I invite people into a purchaser portal. They can then see all the documents. They can then apply and put in their offer at that point. But then there's also other platforms where you put in an offer and you can see where you rank in terms of the other offers that are submitted. Maybe you're third in line. So it means there's two other offers above yours. So there's a bunch of different ways you can submit an offer. And there's also some agents who still use pen and paper.
Amazing to me that they don't lose those offers. A lot of my clients are saying is that they'll see something like best offers by, which is something that comes up a lot in the private treaty world. Can you give us a breakdown of what best offers by is? Is it actually binding? Is it actually best offers by? What is actually the situation with it?
Yeah, not necessarily. unlike an auction where there is, I guess, a reasonable investment in terms of the marketing. So if you were looking at auction and you were trying to put an offer in prior, it's less likely they would accept it because they're spending a fair bit of money marketing, paying for the auctioneer, whatnot, that they're up for those costs regardless. Whereas with the private treaty, they don't have that additional cost, so they may well accept an offer before the best offers buy date. The purpose of that is to push a deadline because otherwise there's just no hurry from buyers if there's not that deadline placed on it.
Hmm. So let's say if it's best offers by a week from now, they could
Mhm.
accept an offer tomorrow.
Yeah, for sure. But even the bad agents, if they got an offer beforehand, they're going to ring you, but
Mhm.
can't assume that that's what's going to happen if you haven't portrayed that you're even interested in the property or if you haven't put any skin in the game. If you haven't put an offer in at all, then they're really not going to reach out to you and go, hey, I've got a really good offer here. Like this is potentially going to be sold. If you're not even in the game, you won't get that phone call.
Hmm. For sure. And that's where it's really crucial to be really switched on and communicating with the agent proactively. Because at the end of the day, if you want the place, as much as you don't want to come across desperate, you've got to make it clear that you want the place. Otherwise, they're not going to call you back. They're not going to present you a follow-up offer or anything like that, right?
Yeah, exactly. And that's where I think some people can approach it with wanting to control the information, believing that's a negotiation tactic, which we'll talk about another time. But in not showing your cards, in not displaying any interest or your level of interest, the agent may potentially just never pick up the phone because they are busy and they're getting multiple offers, multiple inquiries. It's not the marketplace at the moment that they're going to be following you up.
Yeah, for sure. And I know that we're doing a full deep dive on negotiation next week, but I want to quickly dive into a little aspect of it now where, Pete, probably a good segue for you when it comes down to the buyer psychology of putting in offers in particular. You hear conflicting information all the time where people are like, oh, I don't want to tell the selling agent my budget. I don't want to give them too much information. They're going to take advantage of me. But then Sky's just said from the seller's perspective, they need to know that sort of stuff to gauge whether you're interested or even want to move forward on a property. So could you take us through that psychological piece and how you find the balance when you're negotiating on behalf of your clients so that if a first home buyer was listening to this or a first time investor, they would know how much information to give away without giving away the whole farm?
You definitely need to give away some information because realistically, they might get 100 inquiries. So they might have 20 or 30 people come through the open home on the first weekend. They might get 20 phone calls and then they might get 30 inquiries through realestate.com. I think it's really naive for people to think that the agent's just going to call them because they've either attended the home or made an inquiry online and haven't made any real effort to actually communicate with the agent to start with. If you've just walked through the home and then walked out and never spoke to the agent aside from at the beginning, they're not calling you back.
Mm.
So the idea of holding back all your information is certainly dated. And I think that's more of the boomer mentality. And that definitely needs to change now because information and communication is key in everything and particularly in negotiations as well. So you obviously want to find a fine balance between not giving away too much, but really letting them know that you are interested so that if they do sell prior, they're going to give you a call and let you know they've got offers and that they're selling. So one of the things that we coach our clients through is being comfortable with letting the agent know that we are interested from day one. And that's where that communication piece comes in, where we will call the agent before we attend the open home so that they know we're interested. Deals can get done before open homes too. Before the first open home, if it gets listed on a Monday and the first open home is that Saturday and it's best offers in 2 weeks' time, the deal can still get done. So you do need to communicate as soon as possible and get over that mentality around holding too much information back. So I guess to summarize, it's really making sure that A, you are interested, have a reasonable conversation around the price guide and where the agent's seeing value if there is a price guide. And if there isn't, ask them about recent comparable sales. Don't disclose your budget, but give them a ballpark. For example, if it's 800s, he's like, yeah, we're probably thinking in the low 800s or the mids or something like that. Don't give away too much information, but Also, don't lowball them either. If the price guide's 850 and you tell the agent 750 on the phone call, they're not calling you back.
No. You got to be reasonable, right? There's negotiation and then there's just wasting people's time. The market that we're in at the moment in particular, if you're going in 10, 15% under the range, the agent's just going to think that you're a time waster. And the problem is that if you're looking in a certain area in particular, that agent might have 10 listings, right? And as soon as that agent puts you in the time waster bucket, Sky, you could probably attest that not a lot of effort goes into following up that person after that point, right? Like once that bridge is burnt, that bridge is pretty much burnt.
Correct. Yeah. You know about one that I had recently that was 80, 90K under minimum what it should have sold for. Did I call him back? No. What's the point? Like, there's absolutely zero chance of him ever coming even close to being where we need to be. And maybe he had more money. Maybe I should have called him. But I'm going to continue working with the people who I know are in the price range.
Exactly right. There's negotiation and then there's just wasting time, really. Pete, to your point, you've got to make it known to the agent that you're serious. And part of that is your opening offer. Don't blow the price guide out of the water and offer like 20 grand over what they're asking, but at least be in the same suburb. Just don't be 2 suburbs away price-wise where it's just never going to happen. And I just want to latch onto something that you just said earlier as well, that deals can get done before the open home. And I think for a lot of first-time investors, first home buyers, they might not realize that, and we had a client do this recently, that there was an open home on the Sunday. They were really keen on the property. They were consistently missing out and super frustrated. They got on the phone to the agent and they organized a private inspection on the Tuesday night. They got out to the property 5 days earlier than everyone else did, established themselves as really serious, and they had 5 days up their sleeve to actually negotiate and go back and forth with the vendor to get a deal done. And in that situation, because they went in with a very proactive attitude and they didn't go, oh, we'll wait until the open and we'll try to speak to the agent in and amongst like 30 other people who are there, they established themselves as the early favorite. And even though the agent was like, oh, we still want to do the open.
Yeah.
After the open, my client was the one that was getting the first phone calls and all the updates to get the deal across the line because they just showed how serious they were by just getting on the phone, organizing a private inspection and entering those negotiations early. And I think that's something that when you're a first home buyer in particular, you don't know what you don't know, and you're going to be naturally passive sometimes.
Right.
And it's the people who are kind of proactive and assertive that tend to actually get the purchase, right, Sky?
Yeah. And that's where what you're putting out is what you're going to get back. If you are just like, as Pete said, walking through an open and then walking back out, it's just not the way you secure a property, particularly not in private treaty where you do have to take action. Unlike showing up at an auction, you're just there, you can raise your hand. You actually need to, put some effort in. But I wanted to touch further on that point that I think people wouldn't necessarily know that once a property hits the market, yes, okay, there might be a weekend open, but potentially that's already been advertised off market prior to it hitting the market. So it could actually, say, go online on Monday, but a buyer comes out of the off market process, buys it on the Wednesday, it's done and dusted. They likely wouldn't actually proceed with that open. So sitting back, waiting for that weekend open could be the biggest mistake.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's a great point, right? Is that as part of the private treaty process, there's off-market stuff that happens before it even goes on market and enters that negotiation phase, which, to Pete's point, if you're building those relationships with the agents, you might see that property first. But if you haven't got those relationships in place, then you could be seeing the property last, even though it only got listed yesterday.
Mm.
Cool. I think that's a really good place to move on from best offers buy, closing, and the early offer stage of the journey. Let's talk about conditions. So, as much as price and agreeing on a price is important, Pete, can you walk us through, firstly, what are conditions and how do they work in a private treaty situation?
So conditions are attached to the sale, which basically means once whatever you've agreed to as a condition has been met, then the contract will convert to unconditional, which basically means it's a done deal and the buyers can't get out of the contract and all that's left is settlement. Probably the three most common conditions we see are subject to finance, subject to building and pest inspection, and subject to the sale of a property. And if I start with the finance clause, the subject to finance means basically if you can't get your loan approved for the property, you can pull out of the contract. So ideally, you've got a pre-approval already, you've spoken with your mortgage broker, you know what the valuation is going to come in at, but there are times where shit happens and the finance isn't approved. And that just allows you to pull the contract without any penalty. Subject to building and pest inspection basically means you can get the building inspector out within a time period, normally within the cooling off period or maybe 7 days. They can go out there, do the building and pest report, provide it to you. Any major structural defects, you can pretty much pull out of the contract based on that report. And then the other one is subject to a sale of a property. So if you're looking to buy the property, you put that as a condition. You need to sell your own property first for that kind of contract to then convert to unconditional. That's probably not as common, but we are seeing it with upsizes and downsizes as well, inserting that clause.
Yeah, for sure. I think at the moment in my space, what we're seeing is that there's real difficulty for people to be able to secure bridging finance, which is essentially you're able to borrow what you need to purchase your new property before selling. Getting access to that is a lot more difficult now, which is leading to a lot more subject for sale popping up. I want to just quickly touch on red flags in the condition space. So, Sky, let's say someone's got a finance clause inserted. What's a red flag for you as the selling agent if there is a finance clause?
Not always, but when someone is borrowing most of the money, it can be a more precarious position than if they have, say, they're only borrowing 70 or 80%. I was speaking to a buyer not so long ago for nearly $1 million spend and he was only borrowing 60K. So I was like, yeah, it's fine. Not an issue because most of that purchase was in cash. So the finance clause was super safe in that sense. But if he was buying a $950,000 property and borrowing, I don't know, $850, it's a bit tighter.
Yeah, for sure. The loan amount is definitely one. What about the time period that they're asking for in the finance clause? Is that something that becomes an issue?
Yes. And this is where you need a good broker who has different options, Inti. But if someone comes to me and they want 21-day finance, I'm pretty unimpressed with the offer. 7 days is the best outcome. 14 we might tolerate if the price is good, but 21, don't waste my time.
Yeah. And that's so funny because 21 is usually the standard default in offers. People will put in 21 days finance. And again, bringing it back down to the first home buyer or the first time investor who gets told by their bank or their broker that, yeah, we'll need 21 days to organize finance. They don't actually realize how much that impacts their ability to purchase a property, which I know that we'll dive into a little bit more in the negotiation episode that we've got coming up. But very important to flag that finance timeline for you, Sky, is a massive red flag in terms of how you position an offer to a vendor, right? Whether you'll recommend it or whether you'll tell them, you know what, take less money, but take the settlement that's going to happen a month earlier.
Take the done deal because you don't want that uncertainty for 3 weeks. Because let's say it falls over, you're potentially back on the market. That's a massive risk that is just not worth taking. It's a massive jump of potentially losing all of your buyers that you might have had, say, lined up behind offer one. In a 3-week period, they'll likely go buy something else in this market and back to zero.
And that's the last thing a seller wants is to have something fall through and then go back on the market because most of their buyers have moved on to something else.
Yeah. And psychology-wise, it doesn't look good to buyers. It positions the vendor in a lesser position. A contract fell over. Like, it does happen. It's not the end of the world. But if a property was for sale, went under contract, then she's back on the market. It just sort of raises some questions around, what's wrong with it? They find out it's riddled with termites. Did they find out that this wasn't approved by council? Like, you don't know. And so buyers will draw their own conclusion and theoretically make their offers lower.
And staying on the topic of red flags and conditions, Pete, if you were to give us the top 3 of red flags that would pop up in a pest and building that would potentially make you pull out, for example, for a client.
The first would be termites. That's the biggest one. But if the termites are on a fence line or something like that, no evidence that it's hit the actual building, then that's fine. But if there's significant evidence that there's been termite damage or current termites within the building, we would never touch it. We'd pull it straight away. Wouldn't even think twice. The second one would have to be something structurally wrong with the roof, which isn't going to be a cheap fix. That would probably be number 2. And then number 3 would be if it's a recently renovated bathroom and then there's signs that the waterproofing has failed. So very, very high moisture readings. Now, moisture readings are quite common in older bathrooms, so plus 10 years old. But if it was only renovated a year or 2 ago and there's high moisture, that's definitely a big red flag too. And it pretty much indicates that waterproofing has failed and the structural integrity of the bathroom is basically no good.
And we're only just talking about this before we started recording. For moisture readings in particular, what would be the key document that someone would ask for from the seller to see whether waterproofing was done right?
You can't. Unless it's been recently renovated, you'd ask for the compliance certificate. And that's something that we always do straight away. But if it's been 2, 3, 4 years, you may not get that certificate. That's that. Yeah. And that's the problem where the building and pest report will pick up the moisture readings. So if it's within 12 months and they can't produce that compliance certificate, we actually still walk away as well. Really just depends, but the compliance certificate's the big one, I guess. And if you can't do that, building report will tell you if there's any issues with moisture. But don't get scared of moisture readings because it is common. It's just the recently renovated bathrooms you need to be very careful with.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that's something that a lot of people don't know around pest and building. There's probably 2 things that stick out. You can use it as a negotiation tool, which we'll cover next week in negotiation, what you can do to take advantage of knocking a few $1,000s off the price. But also, you can get additional inspections done. So if the pest and building does have a high moisture reading, or there's something flagged regarding the structure, or another one that we have pop up is electrical related stuff that gets flagged on a pest and building report, that doesn't stop you from organizing a plumber to go out and do an actual plumbing inspection, to get an electrician out to look at wiring in more detail, or to get a proper builder out to look at structural issues with the property. I think where a lot of people get caught up is that they'll think that all they can do is pest and building, and they need to make a decision off that. Whereas if there's a major red flag, like the waterproofing, for example, you can actually request extra time to get a plumber out to have a look at it in more detail. Because at the end of the day, a pest and building inspector, yes, they might be a qualified builder, for example, but they're only looking for risks. They're not looking at everything in full granular detail and pulling apart the house. And I think that that's where a lot of people can get lost when it comes to pest and building inspections, is that realistically, the inspector's only there for an hour or 2? They're not actually there for a whole day pulling apart the house. So if they do flag something, I would definitely recommend potentially getting an expert trade out in that field to actually have a look at it in more detail.
Yeah, and you got to make sure you build that into the contract as well. Like if you've gone and done the building and pest and something like that's come up, you need to work with your conveyancer and add it. Because if you don't get that all done within the time frame that you're allowed to do the building and pest and all that, you may find yourself stuck and locked in with the contract. So yeah, just working with your conveyancer to add that into the conditions, because you can add conditions after you've actually had your offer accepted as well.
Yeah, because that's the point, that everyone's going to be pretty motivated because they don't want this to fall apart for something minor. So that's a really good point that you said, Imti, that most people will just go, oh, it popped up this. Okay, we'll just pull out. Well, hang on. Do you actually know what it's going to cost? Do you know what the solution is? No, I'll just pull out. Well, why don't you actually find out? And then you've got more information you can make a decision on. And generally, the vendor and agent are going to be quite motivated to make that happen at that point rather than go back to the drawing board.
Especially in cooling off period as well.
Yeah. Because when you're in that deep, everyone's agreed to a price. They've mentally committed to buying and selling on both sides of the fence, right? So that is the point where you go, okay, I can take a little bit of extra time as a buyer to make sure that everything's right because the seller wants to sell to you. They've agreed to sell to you. So the power balance almost switches in that scenario. So just to do a quick recap, for private treaty, we've covered what is a private treaty, finding the listing, so either using online directories or reaching out to agents directly. When you're happy with the property, putting in an offer, and what do things like best and final actually mean and whether they're binding. Seller and buyer psychology, a little bit of negotiation, conditions, pest and building, and finance. So in the journey, we're pretty close to the end. We're probably 3/4 of the way through. The next thing that I want to touch on in terms of the buyer's journey. So you've gone through, you've done your pest and building, you've agreed to a price, everything looks really good. The key one that I see a lot of deals fall over on, if a buyer isn't prepared and working in tandem with their broker, is the valuation of the property. So as part of getting financed approved, a valuation of a property needs to get done. So say you agree to purchase a property for $650,000, the bank will organize a valuer to come out to the property and basically do a valuation that's independent to the buyer and the seller and align it with the $650,000 purchase price. Now, the risks that happen with valuations are, if it's an in-person valuation, you're hamstrung when it comes to time because let's say you want to get finance approved in 7 days, but the valuer can't get out there for 4 days. And then it takes them 2 days to get a report back to the bank. And then it takes the bank 2 days to process that report. You're already over 7 days. So valuation timing is a crucial one. And then the valuation price is another crucial one. If you've dramatically overpaid for a property, it could be that a lender will go, you know what, you've paid 650, we're only going to value it at 600,000. You need to come up with a cash difference now. Otherwise, we're not going to give you finance approval. And that is another high risk situation where things tend to fall apart. And if you're working with a broker who actively works in the purchasing space, which is very different to the refinancing space, they will be across what banks do what sort of valuations. We had a mutual client recently, Pete, where we put in a 7-day finance offer. And I knew that with that lender, I could do what's called a desktop valuation. So no valuer would go out to the property. We would just use the bank's data and we knew what the high end of that valuation was. So when you put in your offer on the property, let's say it was at 700,000, we knew that the bank would actually value it up to 730,000. And so we weren't worried about the valuation. We also weren't worried about someone going out to the property. The opposite of that is I had a client who was based in the Northern Territory, and classic territory, everything out there gets done manually. Paper settlements, everyone goes out to visit properties, etc. And the property that this client was looking at was probably about an hour and a half outside of town. And there was only 2 valuation companies that covered that suburb. Now, the client had 14 days for finance, but because of the circumstances around where the property was, the first valuer said that they would do it, and then they bombed out 4 days in because they were like, oh, we're too busy, we can't do it. The next valuer picked it up. They couldn't get out there for another 4 days. That's 8 days out of 2 weeks gone. And then the valuer got sick. And so they couldn't get the report done, right? And it was purely circumstantial, but they almost actually had the sale fall over because of the valuation. The saving grace in that situation was we were working with a conveyancer who was local and was able to just basically tell the agent, come on, mate, you know this area, you know that there's only 2 valuers. We can't help the fact that a valuer got sick. Let's have some common sense about this. But if my client hadn't have picked a local conveyancer, that conversation may not have happened. the seller could have just been like, oh no, we'll pull out. So valuations along with pest and building and finance clauses separately, valuations in particular can take on a lot of risk in the process. And so if you're a first home buyer or a first time investor, what I would say is ask your broker how they handle the valuation process during the purchase, because that is actually going to be more important than the rate that you get or your loan features or anything like that. Because at the end of the day, if they can't master that valuation piece, it doesn't matter. Everything will fall apart from that point.
Yeah, you can really lose the deal if you haven't got the vows. If the vow doesn't stack up, you can lose the deal. Unless you've got a good broker, because they can also look at different banks as well, right? It may not stack up with one bank, but another bank may vow it a little higher and that'll get the deal over the line as well.
Yeah, and we try to avoid that and just position it with the right lender at the start. But sometimes there's things that you don't know. A lender might have a high concentration of lending in a certain suburb. And so they might go, you know what, we're going to reduce the valuation of everything in that area by 20% because we just don't want more exposure in that area. And you don't know that until the valuation gets done. So yeah, I think that's a great call out, Pete. Now, when we're looking at the process, let's say offer's been accepted, pest and building's fine, finance is done, part of that was evaluation and we're sweet. We hit the point which is unconditional. So we go from conditions to unconditional. Sky, can you walk us through what is unconditional?
Yeah, it's just pretty much that all conditions have been met, the deposit's been paid, cooling off is finished. We're now just counting down the days for settlement. And in the back end, settlement used to be that, particularly in South Australia, I don't know about other states, but literally the conveyancers would head down to the land titles office and literally over a table swap the title over with the other party. Now it's all digital, but it was not that long ago. Like I'm talking 2019, they were doing this. And it's been the most archaic system until then. So, but that settlement usually would occur at any given point on settlement day, and you don't get keys until settlement has occurred. And there's lots of things that can derail a settlement on the day.
So talking about derailing a settlement, I know from my perspective, when we're organizing the loan, we've got to make sure that the client's loan documents are signed off. They've gone back to the bank, they've organized building insurance, and essentially all the boxes are ticked for the lender. And the client has their funds in what's called a shortfall account. So a shortfall account is where you might have your deposit funds available, and the conveyancer can access those funds on the day to actually complete the sale. So
Yeah, one thing. Has everyone checked that that can happen? Because I've heard of stories where transfers weren't approved, settlement had to be delayed.
Yes. And so that's where it comes down to making sure that all the boxes and forms and everything are done, sorted. That's where your broker really adds a lot of value and your conveyancer, because your conveyancer will be the check and balance and the broker will be coordinating a lot of your form completion and things like that. But I've definitely heard it before where no one could access the money that needed to be used on settlement day. And so settlement had to get pushed back. But I think that's where, following on the private treaty process, once the conditions are met, loan documents are signed off, your money's in the account ready to go, you've got building insurance, you've signed off on everything that you need to, it really brings us to then settlement and settlement day. Pete, can you walk us through what that looks like?
Yeah, so you basically get the phone call from the conveyancer saying it's all sorted, ideally, and then the agent as well will give you a call. You'll go out, pick up the keys and get a present from the agent and the property's yours. And there's a certain time as well. So it doesn't just happen at any time. It needs to be a certain time in the day where settlement is set to occur, which the conveyancer should be able to tell you the day before settlement. So yeah, happy days after that.
Always tell people though, let's say you've got a settlement booked for 11 a.m. Don't book your truck for 11:30 because things can and do go wrong. And really, the conveyancers need a window as well in case something falls apart. Just buy yourself some time there. I know
Also Fridays.
But yeah, Fridays.
Try to avoid Friday.
Yeah.
Because you might not be able to move in on the weekend as well if there's a delay. So yeah, if you're moving in, Fridays are not a great day to settle.
100%. And as much as everyone wants to try and aim and hit that settlement day, sometimes things will just happen that's outside of everyone's control and it just doesn't happen. Yeah, the moving truck story, I have heard multiple times where there's a moving truck there ready to go and no one can do anything because a property hasn't actually sold yet. So they can't move anything in. So that's really the end to end of a private treaty sale. And settlement is really, really exciting. But for a lot of people, it's actually just a relief to get there. And the euphoria doesn't really kick in until you move in. It's a stressful journey. Your team of experts will try and make it as stress-free as possible, but you're still going to be stressed out along the way. It's just the nature of buying property. It's not easy. It's a massive pain. But at least if you've been listening to this point, hopefully you have a really clear understanding of what private treaty process looks like and have gotten some value out of what we've talked about today. Because I think, again, bringing it back to spring and selling season, we're already seeing it in all of our spaces that I'm seeing pre-approvals go through the roof. Pete, you've got a lot of briefs going out. Sky, you've got listings happening. So it's all happening. This episode will be a really valuable resource if you are actually going to look out to buy. To bring us home, I want to wrap us up on a toxic take. One sentence that might be blunt, might offend you, might be a little bit direct in terms of private treaty sales. I'll kick off with mine. If you're a tight ass on rate, you will overpay or you'll miss out completely. So don't focus on your home loan interest rate. Focus on who's going to get the job done. Pete, what would be yours?
Mine would be don't fuck around, put your best offer forward.
Nice and friendly.
Straight to the point.
Yep.
Don't assume no deadline means you have forever.
Yep. Reminds me of the best and final conversation that we just had. Don't push it. Cool. Guys, as always, if you're a first timer, thanks for making it through to the end. If you're a regular, thank you again. If you do need help on your property journey, Pete is our resident buyer's agent. He works with clients on the ground in Adelaide, but also interstate investors. So if you're in Sydney looking to buy in Adelaide, or if you're in Adelaide looking to buy in Melbourne, Pete's your guy. Sky will be able to help you with any Adelaide-based property management and sales. And yours truly, I'll be able to help you with any finance-related things, whether that be home loans, commercial, business, self-managed super funds. And all of our details will be in the show notes. But again, thanks, guys.